A bit ago there was a Steam sale, and during it I bought Trails in the Sky. What I imagine is the first game. I mean, at the very least I hope that's what they mean by Chapter 1, but I picked it up because I heard it was a JRPG with a really good story, and to me that's the most important part of a game. The gameplay being good is of course something I'll never look over, but I find that games I play for the story usually stick around in my memory a lot longer than the ones I play for the gameplay. And I feel like it's been a while since I really played a story-focused game. I mean, thinking back on it, there's been like Expedition 33, but that's been some months ago. Final Fantasy Tactics, but the story didn't really blow me away, just felt like an average JRPG story. But aside from those, the last big story-focused game I played was Metaphor, an entire year ago. So it got me wondering what I played throughout that time, and I realized, oh yeah, like a million different gacha games. For videos, I had played a ton and went through the story of them, with some of their stories taking a lot of time to go through because they're basically just visual novels. Though I was wondering why I didn't think of those gachas I played when I thought about story-focused games, and I think the reason why is because it's kind of hell for gachas to make a good story. And I know what I just said sounds crazy because you probably thought of some generational story you read in one and are now preparing to cut my face off and wear it, but I don't feel like what I said is crazy, as these games can have really good stories that I feel like more people should bring up instead of other things that are brought up over discussion of these games, but the genre itself can heavily work against a story, which can make it harder to write. So I wanted to discuss some of what these problems are, go through why I think they make the story harder to write and why I view them differently than story-based games, or how the genre itself, namely the marketing aspect, influences the story writing. Then focus on games I think do a good job of combating these problems and how that brings the story to a better level. Now, the problems I've seen with making a story for a gacha game, the common pitfalls you'll have to deal with are, to focus first on characters, a lot of the problems stem from the desire to sell as much as they can. This makes it so they're often being made to revolve around the protagonist, being watered down to sell, not having big connections between each other, not existing outside of their marketing segments, then needing to throw characters at your face every patch to sell them. And to focus on restrictions with overall story aspects, there's a story never ending, it being a constant yes and fan backlash happening over some of the most minor shit really holds back these games from doing something brave in its story. Though fan backlash is really open-ended for a point, so later I'm going to talk about which backlash is usually common to see. Those are just the general ones I found, and y'all can probably think of some gachas that have run into these problems before. Namely, if anything, the fan backlash, because there have been so many cases of the most pointless drama being made out to be the end of the world. But to talk about an easy common problem first, the characters and hell, everything in the story needing to revolve around the protagonist. I'm not gonna lie. When I go to play a gacha that I've heard has spectacular world building and I watch as before my eyes whenever it goes to show something in the world and needs to find a stupid ass way to shoehorn in the player character, bro, I want to cry. Now, there are times it makes sense, like if you're exploring the world via that character and their perspective is really the only one that matters. Think for example Limbus Company, where, yeah, there's this big world and the world building will be established, but first and foremost, this is a story about Dante and the sinners. That's what it revolves around. It's the only thing that's important, and it works because the story is built around that. But think about if, in Nikke, the story of the Gachas squad was explained, but they felt the need to keep the protagonist in the story. So instead of making it so you just watch what happens, and as far as you know, at that point of the story, the commander knows none of this, because this shit's off in the past, they make it so the commander accidentally stumbles upon like a VR headset, and after pressing play, they figure out the story of what really happened. And every now and then in the story, it cuts to the commander YouTube reacting to some tragic shit. Like, it seems stupid. Imagine if in Arknights during the second Siracusa event, the doctor was just staring at Lapland and Texas, watching them play the most dramatic damn Yuri ever, and just yelling at them to get a room at the end. Okay, wait, that actually sounds kind of funny, I wouldn't be against that. Or in Reverse 1999, what if they felt the need to throw Vertin into every single event? It'd get kind of comical with how often they would be throwing her into different time points. Yo, she'd straight up be like, oh, ancient China? Been there. The fall of the Roman Empire? Watched it happen. The cavemen inventing fire? Who you think taught them? But when I bring up the story feeling they need to revolve around the protagonist, I don't just mean from their perspective. I more so mean it's a part of a greater problem with a lot of these games where the player character is treated like the center of the earth and nothing else is as important. Even when thematically, within the world, that doesn't make sense. And I don't mean to say this and make it sound like I'm hating some of the stories that are trying to be more of a power fantasy or specifically focus on the protagonist above all else, because even though it's not my cup of tea, I'm not going to judge a genre of a story by, well, it's sticking to the genre. I more so mean in the sense that the plot and characters of a gacha, mainly the characters, but the plot conforms to this also, are being crafted to make you like the marketed character or be interested in the marketed character or whatever. A lot of the time, the stories in these games are made as a pipeline for you to want to roll for the character. Not to say a story that focuses on a character is bad, just ones that exist to give you a character. Think for example, Arknights. For the most part, I think it heavily avoids this issue as a lot of the events feel like they're meant to build up the world more. That risk of characters not really appearing that much in their own event or not taking the spotlight. Like Ascalon releasing with a Babel event story, but being far from the focus of it, as that story mainly focuses on world building. But since Arknight's been going on for a while, of course it has event stories that are misses, and if I wanted to look for one that just felt like it was there to sell or focus on the banner character, Gavial the Great Chief returns as easy pickings. For overall plot significance, nothing important really happens. I am being dead ass. It feels like a filler episode of an anime. Not just because it's also a beach episode too. The entire story is just a pretty minor conflict between Gavial and Eunectes. However the hell you pronounce that name. And it's clear it was just made to introduce Eunectes as a character. That's it. That's all it does. I wouldn't even say it's all that good of an introduction to Sargon because the region's so vast, you also got places like this in it, so you can't really use it 100% for that. Then let's look at the one right next to it, Mario Neural. Even though it focuses on her and is very much her story of going through the tournament, it sets up Pinus Sylvestris, tells more about her family, and is set up for Nearlight. And the Great Chief, all it provides to the overall plot is Eunectes existing. But Mario Neural, released right after, does so much more. That's the difference I'm talking about. One feels like they needed a story for a character banner, the other feels like they wanted to tell a story about the world with interesting characters. And yes, of course, it's early Arknight stories, so there definitely were some growing pains back then within the plot. This isn't meant to be me condemning the story, as I think it's one of the best I've read, and I also plan to praise it later. It was just an easy example. But, okay, to be fair, I don't think we could fully blame growing pains. I mean, dear God, before this was Twilight of Olamund and Dark Knight's Memoir. After was Mario Neural and Mansfield Break. Okay, so, maybe growing pains had a fair bit to do with it, but that's the difference I'm talking about. It feels like most gachas make story as a vehicle to sell their characters instead of making an interesting world with characters you are invested in. In Arknights, there's a laundry list of NPCs I want as playable characters. In other games, I don't got any NPCs I care about because whenever a new character is brought into the story, it's when their banner is up. And when that banner is gone, we get to witness some KGB level operation against that character because goddamn, we never see their ass in the story again. They ain't even on the back of a milk carton, bro. They get turned into alchemy dust when that banner timer hits 0. To less of an exaggerated extent, the characters disappearing is actually a problem I had with Wua back when I used to play it. Not the overall story, as the main plotline didn't feel like it was there to sell me characters, though I can't talk about the story now. From what I've been hearing, it's actually really been pulling up, but I played as Zanny's patch, and after getting her to like sequence 3, I eventually stopped playing the game some weeks later due to not have enough time. But from memory of how it was back then, after a character's banner was over, you weren't seeing them again. They were banished to the Shadow Realm or something, bro, like eviscerated, or some only existed in their questline. But another problem that exists from the perspective of no matter what we need to sell these characters is watering down a character to make them more appealing to roll for. And I'm not talking about making them simple and having easy to read character traits, that's just poor writing. I'm talking about actively defanging a character to make them more palatable. If anyone who's going to be marketed needs to be a morally good person, that is how you end up with the most boring cast of characters. If everyone is sunshine and rainbows, happy-ass do-gooder characters, it gets old, quick. But it's also entirely the case that some people don't want to roll for characters who are pieces of shit. Like, I remember seeing some people saying they weren't about to roll for Virtuosa on Arknights because she's done some fucked up stuff in the story, which, if you don't want to pop off, you ain't gotta. But since this is a business model, if companies prioritize making money above all else, which pretty commonly they do, it can end up with the characters you roll for being made to be widely acceptable because that's what makes them money. Not to say the opposite of that and you gotta speak with your wallet and roll for evil characters to make them create more, but to say that if it's a trend which makes companies money, most, especially ones that don't really care about the story, will go to make money. Now, for overall story aspects that I feel like are often impacted, the story almost never ending is the biggest one. For two reasons, this can really hurt the story. Either if the game end of services abruptly and the story can never finish, or if the game does well, since they don't want it to stop and still get money, they keep it going like a hamster wheel forever. Now, not a lot has hit the second example, but too many fit into the first category. But the bigger problem is since ending the story could be seen as the end of the game, like think how Destiny was when they wrapped up the main story of the final shape, then how everyone could after that, it can make stories do everything in their power to extend the plot and not get to a final conclusion. Though, to be honest, the case of Destiny is really particular on its own, because that was a good chunk of the community actually finally wanting to be done with the game. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it was the image of the dude breaking their chains. Motherfuckers wanted out. Then the other problem is fan backlash. Now, you can say this one isn't a gacha specific thing, but I won't lie, some backlash to certain story aspects in games I only see in gachas. I don't know what it is, I don't know if they're cursed, but so many times, shit that fly in a regular game just doesn't in a gacha. But generally, it'd be like, characters having relations between each other, not even romantic, like friend relationships. I was able to do an entire video on people fucking losing their minds over that. Characters you can get via gacha dying in the story. Sometimes people don't have huge crash outs, others I've seen voodoo summoning rituals be done because of it. And having the protagonist either shown as weak or have weakness. Now, I think a lot of these restrictions for the overall story can come from the idea of, I spent money to get this character, I feel entitled to how they're written, so if you write them in a way I don't like or kill them off, I'll be mad. Not to judge if that's a fine perspective to have, because I don't care to get into that now, but it can hamper what's willing to be written in a story. As I've heard a couple of times now when authors explain their stories, they say characters go off and can break the bounds of what they intended for their plot. That's what happens when you write them fully in character and let that influence what happens in the story. But if during the writing process you need to kowtow around other people's wants and expectations for the character, when those don't match up with the actual character, it can create pretty sloppy writing. But those are the general problems I see when it comes to what gachas have to deal with for writing their story that not a lot of other story-focused games need to deal with, or need to deal with to the same extent. Not to mention how being in live service makes the writing itself 20 times harder because you're expected to release good story consistently at a steady stream rather than being able to take significant time between games. Now, I want to talk about games I think do a good job at avoiding some of these problems and what they do. The main games I want to focus on are Reverse 1999, Arknights, and Limbus Company. There's definitely more I could bring up too, and I will, but I just want to focus on them as the main games because I feel confident talking about them. So one that's a very easy example to bring up of a gacha that avoids all this is Limbus, because they just didn't really make it as a gacha. Like deadass, let's just speedrun this because it's funny how much of this they were able to sidestep. Any watering down of a character to sell them doesn't exist because Limbus doesn't sell characters. They have a core cast and just sell alternate versions of them cosplaying as other characters you see in the story. And those other characters, from chapter 1 they showed they don't give a damn about executing them in front of your eyes, so they set the tone immediately. Don't gotta care about throwing stuff and events in your face to get money. If they want to make a unit to roll for, they have an insane backlog of factions and characters to go through. The entire cast is vastly interconnected, it doesn't just feel like it all revolves around Dante. They are more than fine with making morally bad characters, as is evident by the game opening up with a page of content warnings. Since people don't directly gacha for NPCs, they don't feel entitled to them. Doesn't mean they won't be worried if they'll die. I remember like 3 friends of mine were on the edge of an emotional breakdown, terrified if something was going to happen to Hohenheim and Canto 9, but even on top of that, since most people don't need to gacha for the characters, it adds even less of that mentality to the game. Then since you have a core cast, it doesn't feel like they get left behind outside of their marketing period, as the marketing identities are only based around the supporting characters. And the story is fully tied to exploring the characters as it's making progress towards an overall goal, as that's what the game was built around. The only problems I brought up that can really relate back to Limbus Company is that the story revolves around Dante because it's all from their perspective, as it's been the case for all the studio games, so it's by design. But in that case, I wouldn't call it a problem because it's what they're specifically aiming to do. It's what they want to do. It never feels shoehorned in or added when it would make no sense. Then the only thing really beyond that is when the story's gonna actually end. Genuinely, that's the only part it being a gacha makes me worried about for Limbus. I mean, fan backlash too, I suppose, because they've crumpled to that before, but 99% of the time that's regulated to balance patches, so the story doesn't really get changed as a result. But the only wonder I got is, when is the story gonna end? How are they gonna end it? Like, will it just be done and that's it? Keep the servers up for some time after, or make an offline version? I feel like they do got an overall plot and know what they want to hit at the end and what project it'll move into afterwards. Just none of us have an idea of what that's going to look like. But it does make it a good example of a game that is a gacha, but due to being so outside of the norms, they can largely avoid these problems. And one to a bit of a similar extent is Reverse 1999, which I was able to play the 3.4 story a bit in advance for this video, as this video is sponsored by Reverse 1999. But it's also an example of a game where it doesn't feel like it needs to have its story chained to the protagonist. The case is with the story that at the year 1999, time started moving backwards and you're trying to find out why. So as a result, you do spend a lot of time as the protagonist, Vertin, and seeing both her life and investigation into why time's moving backwards. But it's also the case that in so many events, Vertin's just not there. They're not afraid to just drop you at a random point of time and make you follow the story of some characters you just met and have that carry the event. The need isn't there to tie every character to Vertin, though of course barring some general explanation of how they ended up in her suitcase. And they're not afraid to have the characters in it have very deep connections to one another. In fact, the community actively wants and praises the multiple times the story has done that. But the 3.4 event is an example of what I was talking about. It drops you in China as you follow the story of a girl seeking longevity, as the girl is a Yao. Yeah, basically, even though she looks like a human, her actual form is a reed. Don't question it. So her lifespan is as long as a reed's lifespan. When winter's over, she's gone. And in her search for longevity, she comes across various points where she can look into what happened in the past. And does Vertin appear there? Nope, she ain't in the story at all. Instead, she follows the story of another reed who also went on the same path, and shows her connection to Paper Heron. You know, I'm not gonna lie, I don't know why she's called Paper Heron. Yep, far from one of the most out there names I've seen a gacha take. I mean, Asbestos still takes the crown, followed shortly by Cement, but I will keep it 100. If it has meaning or connection to some either folklore or wuxia stuff, I'm down for anyone to fill me in. But the event story is built on the bond of Paper Heron and Mayfly. It's through and through their story. They're the entire focus of it. It shows their connection and how the events later on try that connection, and displays how much this longevity means for Mayfly, someone who could only live for a few months. It's something that, if the story had to shoehorn in the protagonist or make it revolve around them, it'd lose a lot of meaning. Like, just imagine Mayfly breaking down about dying in a few months and just cuts to Vern taking her hat off, scratching her hair and going like, man, whew, yeah, that's rough, buddy. It's because of this why Reverse 1999 is a good example of why having your story be able to exist outside of the protagonist can help break the mold. It doesn't feel like you're going through the same stuff on a different day, and in particular, them not being afraid for characters in the game to have deep connections is a breath of fresh air, as I'm used to gachas only softly treading into those waters to not make people mad. And for Arknights, much of the same praise for Reverse 1999 can be said, mainly how it's fine with making stories not involve or be centered around the main character. There's so many plot lines in the world that progress without the Doctor being there, and ones that do focus on them end up feeling earned because the story took the time to build the player character up and show their importance in the world. Yes, at first people were glazing the Doctor, but when it was revealed he had amnesia, people were terrified, some scared, some disappointed, and some suspicious of if that was actually the case. It created intrigue, also made the Doctor feel more human because they weren't shoved up to be a beacon. Them doubting themselves added to that too. It's night and day when compared to Enfield, where you having amnesia gets some characters to perk up, but it really just feels mostly forgotten unless it's needed as an excuse for Perlica to explain something about the world. It's why Levitane's story quest, where the Endman shows their insecurities, was one of my favorite writing moments in the game. It felt real. The Endman didn't seem like just a pillar, they felt like a character. It's just too bad that didn't bleed much into the actual main storyline. But back to talking about the plotline Arknights, it's such a common problem for gachas to forget their cast of characters, as if you're constantly making them, it's hard to give them all screen time. But the business model insists you make a new batch of them every few weeks. And Arknights does fall into the same problem with a good chunk of the characters, mainly the 4 stars and stuff. However, because they have set a core cast of characters to be in the spotlight for various plot lines of various areas, it's a good way to make sure a wide net of characters stay relevant and keep getting development. Like, after Lingering Echoes, Evan Hosel wasn't thrown away, he pulled up in Zwillingstrom. Arturia, teased in Lingering Echoes, pulls up in Hortus de Escapismo, appears in Zwillingstrom, then goes off to pop off in Massa's Travels. Saria, she's got the Rhinelap plotline. Mansfield, Dorothy's Vision, Lone Trail. Because they spent time building their world, they're able to have a different core cast of characters based on the region's story, which makes it so the characters in that plotline don't end up feeling one note, brought in and thrown away when their banner's done. Now, from what I've explained so far, any more examples will be me repeating more of the same, as my thoughts basically boil down to, in a story, the characters are the lifeblood of it. When those characters are set up purely for making money, there's a lot of pitfalls that can make those characters feel less interesting in the pursuit of making money. Most obvious to see is them only existing for one patch. It can end up making the cast feel less important. Think, for example, about a Final Fantasy game. Your main crew of characters in it, that's the main crew. You will be spending the entire journey with them, instead of the entire journey is filled with 100 plus characters that have the depth of a puddle. It's possible to have a wide cast with depth, but it's more likely that, due to time constraints, it being a live service, or higher ups calling the shots instead of the devs that have real passion for the game, a lot of the choices can be made that hurt the character writing and then the overall story writing. Or the story can be watered down to make really safe choices that the suits think will make the money. Like, you know what, okay, A bit of an extreme hypothetical, but hear me out and question if this would be off the mark to see in a gacha. In the original Final Fantasy VII, when Aerith dies, that's it. No reviving. You get a funeral at the end of Disc 2, if memory serves me correctly, and that's it. She's gone. You're never seeing her again. Deceased. But, if it was a gacha game, could you see this happening? Aerith dies in your arms. Big moment. Then in the next patch, or some anniversary patch, you go through an event story where you save her because insert convenient reason here, like power of love, XYZ, XYZ. Then because of the fact you saved her, the character on the banner of that event is an alter form of Aerith. And she's broken as all hell until getting power crept in a year, but that part of this hypothetical is unrelated to the idea of the story. But is that actually off the mark to see happening? That's what I mean when I say being a gacha can impact the story, because something like that is incentivized really only in this business model. You can maybe say it'd be the case for a live service or DLC, but those usually survive off the gameplay and the story being promising for the expansion. But gachas are inherently more character oriented because what they sell is the character. Now, with that being said, do good ones that aren't trying to squeeze every penny you got have this problem? No. But that's not the case for all. And even in the cases for ones with great stories, you can see times where they do stuff that is meant to help their character's markability. But above all, what I think the biggest problem is, would be the never-ending story. When you have a lot to say, it's hard for anyone to want it to end, but I do think there is value in a story finally closing its book, or at least the current arc it's on. Like, is FGO ending service anytime soon? Nah. But the two major story arcs have wrapped up, so there is a sense of closure for that story. It feels definitive. But honestly, that one might just be my personal perspective. I mean, all of this is my personal perspective, but that one might be even more so. Because I mean, okay, for example, I think the high points in Limbus' story beat out the high points in Library of Runa's story, and I ain't afraid to say it. But if you ask me which I think is the better story, I'd easily say Library of Runa, because it's definitive. I know how it's full from beginning to end, but if Limbus keeps this same level of quality up till its ending, that alone would elevate it to honestly top 5 stories I've read in games. Not even if it improves during the upcoming cantos, just if it stays at its current level till the end. But those are the reasons as to why I think, on average, the story in gachas don't hit as hard as the ones in fully released games, not to mention how long it takes to build the story up. You know, we all talk about early stories in gacha being ass. Yeah. When the rep is it gets good after 50 hours, it's hard to really make people invested in the story. But the ones I mentioned, Limbus, Reverse 99, Arknights, do a good job at avoiding these problems, and it's why I think the story in them rivals story-based games that I played. And it's not just them. I'd say some others like Nikke, Heaven Burns Red do fit into this as well. I just don't feel as confident talking about them as I do the other games because I'm yet to play them as much, so I don't feel as though there's as much depth I can give in my discussion. And for some others I played but dropped, I didn't want to talk about them without some caveats to explain that I don't know how the story is in them now. Like, Honkai Star Rail, I can judge up to Penacony. Beyond that, couldn't tell you anything. But I wanted to make this video to discuss these problems that I've seen pop up over the course of me playing a bunch of different gachas for my videos, as I do think there's an interesting discussion to be had, and recently, I've just been wanting to play more story-based games. Kinda, especially because Final Fantasy Tactics left me disappointed as hell in the story because it felt mid after years of everyone saying it's one of the best Final Fantasy games. But I mean, hey, I just had to sneak that one in there. I'm sorry, that's still a fresh wound. I'm not letting that one go. You can say it's a garbage take, but I don't care. It's true.